Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Suzana Yeti and I'm the Agency Portfolio Marketing Manager at PCB. I will be your host for today. Today's topic is why adopt ISO 45001, and our presenter is PCB Certified Trainer and Managing Director of Smart ISO Systems and Smart Mentoring, Mr. David Smart. Mr. Smart's ISO experience spans from more than 40 years as a manager, auditor, and consultant, specializing in information security, quality, health, safety, environment, medical devices, laboratory outsourcing, and asset management systems. During the presentation, you may send in your questions at any time. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. You can also use the raise hand function. We will then unmute you, and you will have a chance to ask the question directly to our presenter. Now we will turn the time over to Mr. Smart. Mr. Smart, you may start the presentation.
Good afternoon, morning or evening, wherever you are in the world. The presentation, as Susanna said, is why adopt 45001. Now, before we get fully into it, I'll give you a little bit of background into myself. I originally set up my consultancy practice offering quality-related services as a result of being made redundant twice within 2 years. After carrying out several projects under the Department of Trade initiative and the local enterprise schemes, which are peculiar to the UK, I was taken on by a large American consultancy group as an ISO system specialist, where I worked in Europe on assignments. After 3 years of living out of a suitcase, I came home again, having achieved my triple goals of credibility as a consultant, exposure in Europe, and broadening my skills in general consultancy rather than purely quality-related issues. In 2000, I again joined an organization specializing in ISO projects, along with certifying them, this time in North America, working on various ISO-type projects from quality, health and safety, the environment, and information security, just as Susanna said. This lasted around 9 years till 2009, when I came home again. This is when I set up my mentor and business coaching sessions, as I felt they complemented the experience I'd had regarding issues when working with clients on ISO projects. I now do mostly coaching and mentoring both on business and ISO issues, work with clients to solve issues, and presenting accredited ISO courses. So what are the benefits? Key benefits. They're accepted throughout the world. OHSAS 18001 is not an ISO standard. ISO 45001 is an internationally agreed standard for health and safety. You will be recognized as being an independently audited company, meeting agreed requirements, and also be able to integrate it with other standards through the adoption of the high-level structure Annex SL. Stakeholder involvement. Demonstrating to everyone involved in your processes is not only a good public relations exercise, but also demonstrates profit is not the only reason you are in business. Stress level measurement. Modern living is very stressful, and it is beginning to be recognized that mental health is important and not stigmatized. Measuring and putting programs in place to recognize and counsel staff, and where required, refer them for professional help. More uptime and motivated employees raises production levels, which is something here in the UK we need to improve compared with our European competitors. And the final one comes to your reputation. Being seen as a good corporate citizen is becoming increasingly more important, not just with health and safety, but also the environment and other social activities. Following publication of the draft international standard, the DIS, in February 2016, the International Committee met in Toronto from the 6th to the 10th of June 2016 to discuss over 3,000 comments which had been submitted during the ballot. It was agreed at the closing session to move to publication on a second disc, which is expected in December 2016 to January 2017. Now, this is an unusual situation to have two discs. There is normally only one. The final standard is now expected to be published in the second half of 2017. There were four main points that came out of that meeting in Toronto. The discussions during the committee meeting centred around minor changes needed on some key terms and definitions, such as the definitions relating to worker, participation, and the definition of a hazard. Minor changes were also proposed relating to areas such as participation and consultation, awareness, and the hierarchy of controls. The next International Committee meeting is scheduled for October 2016, where the remainder of the comments submitted will be discussed and the content of DIS 2 finalised. Recognising how vital occupation health and safety is to keeping employees safe and healthy around the world, it is advisable that you and all interested parties keep up to date regarding the status of this process. Now I'm going to speak a little bit about outsourced processing. You cannot just rely on your contractors to assess the health and safety risk relating to the part of the job that they're doing. Ultimately, you as a prime contractor are responsible. And where there are several contractors that are on site, these activities all have to be covered with risk assessments, and even though one group will do them with contractors to do them, then they've got to share and make sure that the effects don't have an adverse effect on the other contractors, and they've got to consult with them and get it all agreed. Even if the contractor has their own occupational health and safety system, you must do some checking yourself, as a prime contractor, to ensure their system is robust, especially if it is not an accredited one. As an example, how often do they review and update their risk assessments in light of experience gained? Near misses are not always being recorded. That's one example of where people, especially if it's a blame type culture organisation. Tools, as was indicated in the previous slide, it is your responsibility to ensure that any contracts you take on which employ the use of subcontracted services or the hire of equipment are covered as far as exposure to health and safety risk is concerned. It is not enough just to send a questionnaire out and solely depend on the answers given, especially if they are small companies without the resources to document procedures and conduct risk assessments. You must do due diligence. It is not just about carrying out an initial assessment. What are the attitudes and knowledge when some staff come to site? Emergency preparedness and response. As you are going to include the subcontractors in your plan, or is it an independent plan? How is a plan tested? A walkthrough, a simulation? How often is it tested? How often is it updated? For example, when a near miss occurs or new legislation is released, these are just some of the questions you need to ask on emergency preparedness and response and actually testing out your plan. The changeover period. You have 3 years from when the standard is first published, which is next year, mid-next year, towards the end of it, to make the transition from OHSAS 18001 to 45001. This is pretty standard with all certification bodies. Whenever any standard change, they'll give you 3 years. Generally, most people will want to change over quickly, and especially, in my own opinion, now that it's an international standard, I think, and I think that'll be driven as well by people asking them for it. I believe 18001 will be dropped relatively quickly, with people preferring to adopt an international standard. So how difficult will the transition be? An existing gap analysis study. You need to align your current procedures with the new standard using the cross-reference matrix as a guide. This type of transition should not take more than 3 months. Now, this is a personal opinion based on experience. It's only my opinion. I've not seen any stats to back that up. If you're starting from scratch, you already have a lot of the system in place as you have mandatory legal requirements and industry-approved codes of practice to follow. Again, I reckon this should not take any more than 9 months to complete. The third bullet point, writing and updating procedures. Use the pertinent clause and paragraph to address the new requirements that are required. Then the next stage is bedding in. Give training to each line manager using practical examples. A completed accident form or a flow line with checks and balances would be good, as it's a visual experience and it gets people on board. And if you can use actual examples rather than examples from another company, or at least use them from the same industry sector, but preferably use actual examples that you've had in your own workplace. And finally, you need to audit. You're doing some internal audits. Focus on the new requirements specifically, where the procedure is weak. Involve the users, solicit their views, and amend procedures accordingly. The people that are closest to the job will be the people that are most familiar with the things that will go wrong. Where training is required, conduct it involving the line manager. In fact, try to get him to deliver it, or at least partly deliver it, ensuring it is followed out by some form of evaluation in the workplace. For example, say a couple of weeks later, go and test the understanding, go and talk to the people, get the line manager to walk the line, ask 2 or 3 questions. It doesn't need to be a formal assessment, just to see how well it's gone, see how much is stuck, and if not, you need to have another training session, just a toolbox talk probably, in the process, maybe 20 minutes, something like that, just to go over what maybe hasn't been picked up on the day. So that is my presentation. It's quite a short one, but I feel I've covered the most pertinent points. So I'll hand it back now to Susanna, and we'll open it up for questions. If Susanna would maybe read the questions, I'll attempt to give my honest opinion on any points you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smart, for this presentation. We will go ahead and take some time for questions now. Just a reminder, please be sure to type your questions in the question box in your right-hand control panel. The first question is, how do we convince companies who claim that they don't need ISO 45001 or OHSAS 18001 because they have their own safety framework?
Well, that's quite a good question, and it's a good starting point. Now, it's all very well them saying that they have their own health and safety system, but to have it independently verified and make sure that it covers all the points from an internationally agreed standard has to be preferable to only having their own standard in place. And apart from that, probably, especially if they're smaller companies, without necessarily the resources and the reluctance to lay out the costs. The larger contractors will ask them for it, I would imagine, and even give them a hand with some of the training, but there's financial rewards for small companies as well to have good health and safety systems. And I like the idea that they made a start to it, but at least with an international where hundreds of people have inputted into something, has to be better, I would have thought, than just a small group of people doing it for themselves. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is, according to your experience, what were the major changes that have happened in a company after the implementation of OHSAS 18001?
Well, it depends the culture in the organization for a start. If you've got a blame type culture, then it's going to be very, very difficult to get people. They're going to do the minimum according to legislation. But you're trying to get people to do things. It's a bit like Pavlov's dogs. You want the people to do things because it's ingrained into their methods of working practices. And peer reviews and things like that. So the main areas is for me on 18,000 would be risk assessments, contractors, and getting them to fully understand and not see it as a chore, and that's difficult. Auditing, generally speaking, and I'm taking one part of the standard, is generally seen as negative, and health and safety is a lot of the time seen negatively, as we have to do it because the law says we've got to do it. It provides no value to the business, but that is not true. If people are working safe, then there's less accidents, there's more productive time, the morale's high, people are looking after each other, the company wins because it's seen as a good employer. So these are the areas that, generally speaking, I find that health and safety, and apart from that, it tends to be quite a dull subject to try and get people excited about. So you just have to try without putting a fear factor into people. I mean, the last thing you want to do is show them videos or gruesome injuries. You're trying to encourage them to look after each other, and people in general, if they see that people care about other people and nobody wants to be injured at work, so the attitudes of gung-ho and pressures and targets for work should never preclude taking health and safety, because if you do it in the correct way without taking shortcuts, then you're going to get the job done correctly and there's going to be a lot less accidents. And when we're on that subject, an ideal, if you think about zero, I mean the Crosby zero defects, and think about zero accidents in the workplace, and then benchmark yourself against trying to go for zero and try and see how close you can come to it and take the necessary statistics. It's so, and again, it's got to be led by management. Management have to be seen to take health and safety seriously, and with the new legislation now where directors can go to jail and they can't get off the hook so easily, health and safety, and as well as that, insurance policies and companies looking at that. It's all towards saving money, so selling it from a money-saving perspective as well as more productive and a good corporate citizen and all leads towards a better, more happier environment and less stress. And mental health, traditionally there's always been a stigma attached to it, by people saying if they can't stand stress they better find themselves another job. That is being recognised, and as well as that you've got alcohol and drugs as another huge area in there that is beginning to be more accepted now. So these are the areas I feel that are the biggest areas that you'll have problems with. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smart. The other question is, why is it taking this long for ISO 45001 to come out? Are there any issues that the public doesn't know about?
No. It's just, if you've ever been involved with the development of standards, especially worldwide standards, everybody's got a different input, and some people, different countries have different standards and lots of opinions. So it takes a long time when you're dealing with consensus or trying to get a majority decision. But there are no hidden agendas. I mean, apart from anything else, standards are voluntary. Obviously you have to take effect of legislation, but you don't need to go for 45,000 or any health and safety system apart from the obvious, you have to obey the law, but that gives you a lot of scope if you just bear it down to the bare minimum. So there's nothing there. I mean, as I said, it's unusual to have this too, but I see that as a positive thing that people are aboard it now, and it's taken a long time for it to be accepted as an international standard. But my understanding is there's no a big mass of people trying to hide stuff, and the fear for taking it on board. And I mean, the very bare minimum they've got to go for is they've got to meet their legislators and codes of practice for the industry they work in. So no, I'm going on a bit about this, but there's no hidden agenda, and that's not the reason it's been held up. The reason is just to, and again, just to what I said earlier, there's just minor points on trying to get a general agreement on awareness and consultation and things like that. So I don't see it as a negative, I see it as a positive that people want to get it right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smart. And the last question for today is, are there going to be any risk when implementing ISO 45001 after having OHSAS 18001 system for years?
Is there going to be any risks? Is that what you said, Susanna?
Yes.
Well, yes, but risk is the big buzzword now, and risk has a positive side, I mean, as well as a negative side. And risk, most people see risk as negative, but risk provides an opportunity, and it depends on your risk appetite. But specifically in health and safety, you shouldn't be seen it as onerous and shouldn't be seen as a burden and weighed down by procedures and legislation and getting beaten to death. Health and safety should not be limited by profit and targets and all that. The two are not mutually exclusive. So yes, there are risks, but it's just, it should be better because of the number of people that have inputted to it and improved it. And the whole point in this health and safety is to have a safe working environment, safe methods, and nobody wants to be, when somebody leaves the house in the morning, they don't want somebody to phone them up and say there's been a serious accident or a fatality or things like that. So there's no risks in that sense. It should be welcomed as an opportunity for improvement.
Thank you, Mr. Smart. I would also like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. Once you leave the webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we would appreciate if you could complete that and provide your feedback. Also, if you are aware of a topic that you would like to discuss and participants would benefit from, please feel free to write down suggestions. On behalf of PCB and our presenter, thank you for joining us today, and have a great weekend, everyone.
Thank you very much for your time. Bye.